Salams from the People's Dispatch studios in New Delhi. I'm Siddhantani and you're watching Daily Debrief. On the show today, the latest on the Ukraine crisis, we get our weekly COVID update and we round up the Beijing Winter Olympics. First up, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which runs a special monitoring mission to Ukraine, has released a map of ceasefire violations that it observed over the weekend. The observations, and I'll ask our producer to pull up a map as we speak, are in sharp contrast to what the Western media, including the likes of the New York Times, will have us believe. Newsclick Editor-in-Chief Prabir Purkayastha is in studio today to give us a sense of what's going on and how he reads the media's narrative building in the Ukraine crisis. Prabir, first up, the map, of course, and a reading of it. What do you make? What does it tell you?
Well, you know, this has been something which has been going on for the last more than a month. In fact, it's almost 3 months since you've been hearing next week, tomorrow, a certain date, during the Winter Olympics, on the date it closes, after it closes. So dates for Ukraine invasion have been continuously produced. Latest was President Biden saying that he's sure that Putin has made up his mind. He apparently knows what Putin's mind is. They have intelligence information that the invasion is going to take place. Yet, what the US media has produced, the violations of ceasefire, and what the organization, the OSCE, which looks at violations of the ceasefire that was established in Donbass between the Ukrainian government and the rebel which actually holds a part of the Donbass region, they seem to show just the opposite, that in fact the violations are taking place more due to bombardment, artillery shells landing in the rebel-held areas, not in the Ukraine government-held areas. So if the argument is that Russia is using the rebel-held areas, the rebel forces to attack Ukraine, the picture seems to be just the opposite. Right. So why is it that New York Times, Washington Post, and you can point to a host of others, but these are the two major trendsetters of news in the United States. Why should they be talking like this is the big question. And I was reading The Economist today. Right. They have again the same picture. Yeah. It seems that somebody is writing a script for them, which they are following. If you remember, there's a very famous film which was produced, Wag the Dog, where this whole attempt to game international news was created by suitable pictures, and if you show suitable pictures, suitable headlines and so on, then you are able to change the perceptions of the people and change reality itself. So we seem to be in that frame. The serious questions that are there, which was what Russia has raised vis-a-vis NATO's eastward expansion. There are serious questions regarding that United States walked out of the Intermediate Range Ballistic Missile Treaty, and therefore will such missiles come closer to Moscow as the eastward march of NATO takes place? All these are very important questions, as well as what's the status of the Donbass region, particularly as the argument was that they will have a certain degree of autonomy. This is the Minsk Accords and what happens to therefore the follow-up of the Minsk Accords, particularly as they are extremely right-wing fascist forces in Ukraine who have said any attempt to give autonomy to Donbass region means will throw out the government which is there. And they seem to hold at least the guns, a significant amount of the guns and street power. And these are people who with clear Nazi past, Nazi insignias, whatever they wear on the armbands and so on. So their lineage is very clear. And Bandera, who was a part, as you know, of the Nazi support groups in this part of the world, they consider him as a hero, which also the Ukraine government tends to do also. So if you put all of this, it doesn't seem to be, the picture is what of Russia attacking Ukraine. The picture is a much more complex one of Ukraine being a cat's paw in the hands of the United States and Western forces in its eastward expansion towards Russia. And also whatever they had conceded in 2015, the Ukraine wanting to go back on it, and therefore Russia coming out as a defense of the people who are under attack and who are under various kinds of laws in Ukraine. Their language, television station, public space, use of Russian, all of this is
educational institutions.
Educational institutions are very serious issues because it's a ethno-nationalism then you are trying to spread, and there's a strong minority who are Russian in ethnic terms, but much larger numbers who are Russian speakers.
Yeah,
so I think all those issues, instead of addressing that, we are covering it all up in the name of Russia about to invade Ukraine as a meme. And the unfortunate part is that you have the major news organizations in the world very much a party to the meme that the United States seems to have set in motion.
Yeah, I want to focus a little bit more on this media aspect, Prabir, if you will, because it's not the first time we've seen the US media, Western liberal media, become the major sort of weapon in this sort of narrative building. What is your personal take on it, and how have you experienced it over the past few, let's say, US-led wars?
You know, there is a famous statement, presumably attributed to Karl Rove, that we have the ability to create a new reality, and every time you have reacted to it, we have moved on and will create another new one, which is bereft of all the these phrases here. What it says is we have the ability to control the narrative. That's what it says, and we saw that very clearly in the Iraq war. That is one war where this picture was really completely verified, so to say, that Saddam Hussein did not have weapons of mass destruction. The US media did not discuss whether he has weapons of mass destruction or not. The only question was that how do we get Saddam Hussein to accept that he has weapons of mass destruction and tell us where they are. And the issue was never does he really have them. Now, rest of the world was quite psyched by all this because we thought it was a given that he didn't have weapons of mass destruction. There had been extremely serious inspections that had been carried out by the IAEA, and IAEA inspectors had really given the report saying that we haven't found anything. After all of this, the only issue, and I was in the US for a short while, I think about 4 to 6 months before the invasion, and I found that this was not a question discussed anywhere. All the talk shows to main news shows, as well as the newspaper headlines, were all, how do we get Saddam to confess that he has weapons? And the alternative was that Saddam has to then show that he doesn't have them, and he has to prove a negative, which as you know, is physically not possible. You please tell us, prove that you did not commit this crime, but I don't tell you what is the crime. So this is the kind of things that that was there, and in this particular case we have a very similar picture where Putin is supposed to have all set for invasion, and if he doesn't invade, it is because the US has exposed him, and therefore all his machinations have been laid open. Therefore, he has stopped. So then the US wins. If he invades under such provocation, then also US wins. So effectively, the issue seems to be claim victory, and the victory really is that since Russia is not going to invade, and that I think more or less is clear, therefore win the victory, saying because of our pressure, he's got scared, therefore we have won. So this is the unfortunate role that the US media is playing. Not only US, a major part of the international media is playing this role. And unfortunately at the moment, they set the global narrative. Unfortunately, that is true.
Not just unfortunate, but frightening also, this beating of the drums of war all the time.
Particularly when it's a possibility of a nuclear war, if not by design, by accident.
By accident, absolutely. Prabir, it is Monday after all, and as we have been for several weeks now consistently on Daily Debrief, we've been getting an update on the global pandemic situation from Prabir, who's been closely watching both the numbers as well as how things are progressing in various parts of the world. For this week, Prabir, what is your reading of the situation?
Well, in large parts of the world, it's clear that the Omicron did create a very sharp spike. But it's also clear that Omicron numbers or the COVID-19 numbers across the world have been dropping in most places. There are exceptions, but in most places they have been dropping. Some of the exceptions are a little surprising. For instance, Germany is quite high at the moment, Russia is high, South Korea is high. Again, It's not dissimilar to the pattern elsewhere. The numbers go up very rapidly and then fall, but fall more slowly.
Right.
The US numbers have come down, as Indian numbers have also come down, as also UK, for instance, has come down. And in South Africa, of course, the first two numbers where it really came down. So all of this seems a very similar pattern. Also, the second part of it, those who have been vaccinated, serious illnesses have been much less amongst them, and deaths have been much, much lower than among the people who have not vaccinated for whatever may be the reason. Those who have not vaccinated, the death and serious illnesses numbers still continue to be high.
Right.
And the other good part of course within quotes, is that the 2-year-old vaccines also seem to work. So when you look at the efficacy of the vaccines, given the fact that they are based on variants which are at least 2 years, if not older, that we still seem to see relatively good success rates with them. So that is something which is heartening. So these are all the good things.
Right.
The bad thing is, of course, that the vaccine inequity still stays, and it's very, very high still.
If we can focus on that, that was going to be my next question anyway. So where are we on that front? There are lots of conversations happening about the mRNA vaccine, about sort of decentralizing production so that Africa, for example, can have access to vaccines. So how are we progressing on that front?
So here is the problem, that the talk seems to be about mRNA vaccines. mRNA vaccine is not only the technology of production of the vaccine that's the issue. It is a relatively new technology, therefore many less companies can or institutions can develop mRNA vaccines,
right,
or even internalize, indigenize and make it locally. The problem is a second one, which is the mRNA vaccines requires a cold chain.
Right.
And very few poor countries, in fact, poor countries cannot replicate the cold chain that mRNA vaccines require.
Right.
So apart from the cost of mRNA vaccines being high, Pfizer and Moderna are making billions of dollars.
Yeah.
I think Pfizer is going to make more than $45 billion. Moderna more than $30 billion. Moderna has never made a profit. This is the first time they'll be making a profit. Pfizer is the highest profit in a year they're going to get, I think, from the beginning, from when they started. So these are very, very huge profits. But it is based on the fact that they're high cost, which rich countries can pay, poor countries can't. And it requires a cold chain, which poor countries cannot put into place. So therefore, it seems that structural inequities built into the mRNA vaccines itself. I really don't know why they want a hub in South Africa for Africa, because the cold chain is not going to be available in Africa.
Yeah.
So why are the other vaccine manufactured, which is providing equally efficacious in terms of its control of serious illnesses, or even death, of course, yes.
But even hospitalization.
Even hospitalization is much lower among the vaccinated. All of it, if you take into account, there are a whole number of vaccines which are now effective. There is the Chinese vaccines, there is the Indian vaccines, AstraZeneca, which is of course Serum Institute as well. There's Johnson. So there are a large number of vaccines which are now available, which seems to be having efficacy in order to stop the essentially death and serious illness and hospitalization. So why are we not talking about them but only focusing on essentially the mRNA vaccines? It seems to be, it's also a part of, shall we say, a Western takeover of the global vaccine market, using technology as the instrument, and technology which will then be tightly controlled by Western powers. And essentially in this case, really Germany BioNTech, which developed the Pfizer vaccine, and then therefore Pfizer, and of course Moderna, both are the United States. And the public health aspects of this is not coming into play. WTO is going to discuss it this week. In fact, I think tomorrow and the after are the discussion. Let's see what comes out of it. The problem is not just patents. The problem is also that sharing of production and treating it as a public health issue rather than a for-profit pharmaceutical company issue. And I think that's a key problem that we are having. The vision is still that of pharmaceutical companies through various agencies, and instead of it being a public health issue.
Yeah. And like we saw last week, the EU continuing to block also some of these.
Continuing to oppose WTO's
waivers,
that on that. patents and so on, because BioNTech is, after all, a part of that. But it seems to be a much larger thrust that they have to support their pharmaceuticals companies for the future.
Yeah. Thanks so much for that update, Prabir. And finally, the 24th Olympic Winter Games came to a close yesterday in the Chinese capital, Beijing. IOC President Thomas Bach, in his closing remarks, praised the participating athletes and the people of China, exhorting political leaders around the world to follow their example and give peace a chance. I spoke to NewsClick Sports editor Leslie Xavier earlier for our roundup, our coverage of the Games. Leslie, thanks for joining us on Daily Debrief today. The Winter Games, like we said, have come to a close, and the president of the IOC, with some kind words and thanks for the people of China who, of course, hosted the event, praising the athletes and their performances, as well as the volunteers that helped make the Games happen. Of course, we have to remember that it was another pandemic-affected Games, so safety of the athletes and trying to keep any COVID outbreak down was a major objective. All of that, fortunately, went off fairly well. But you have some insights for us in terms of how you assess the overall performance of the Games.
Yeah, of course, we are going to have to commend the Chinese organizers for keeping COVID at bay, because let's just accept that it was not exactly a conducive time with the third wave sweeping across the world, various countries, and then the entire world is converging onto one point in China. And China their protocols were completely fail-proof, so much so that towards the end of the Games, it was single-digit cases per day within the Olympic bubble, the large Olympic bubble. It was so strict, and they achieved that objective that way. The Games began with obviously, as we have discussed this in one of our previous episodes, that the diplomatic boycott that some of the countries from the West, they tried to play it out, but then luckily and gladly so, and this we had expected also, that once the game starts, the talking point will obviously be the Games and the sport and the larger understanding of what is happening on the playing field, and also related to that implications across the world. In that regard, the Games were successful with many new stars emerging out, a lot of great performances on ice and on snow, and many facets coming out of athletic excellence. At the same time, there were controversies too. So my biggest takeaway would be that it is still a global festival. I'm just glad that the diplomatic boycott didn't translate into, messy like the Cold War Olympic Games used to happen, and messy affairs like the Cold War Olympic Games. And at the same time, again, when we talk about Winter Olympics, it's slightly different from the Summer Games as far as the participation of the countries are concerned. So, for instance, it is still governed by the geographic properties that require winter athletes to train and excel. So, Africa this time around had 6 athletes representing the entire continent, and from 5 countries, that too. And these are the countries which has close association with European nations. So that's, it's very clear that these athletes, their base is in Europe and they train over there and they get good enough to qualify and compete at the Olympic Games. So that kind of a reach is lacking for the Winter Games. And over the course of the next couple of decades, can we expect that to grow? That's a difficult question to ask, because Summer Games are also expanding, their programs are expanding, and they face different challenges altogether. But Winter Games have much more bigger challenges to deal with, and the first and foremost one is climate change, which is affecting which is dwindling the scope of various traditional centers to host these games. So now Beijing hosted the games, but Beijing, the climatic conditions that are prevalent within that geographic location is such that it's a dry winter. It's somewhat close to where we are. In Delhi, it's also a dry winter. It doesn't snow. So artificial snow was made over there, but then it was cold enough to allow that to happen. But with the rising global temperatures, it's becoming a bit of a problem. It's becoming quite a challenge to safely hold these host event. These games event. It's not just about uh, the facilities and providing this thing. It's also, the concern is also safety for the athletes, because when we do, for instance, ski jumping, for instance, or snowboarding, freestyle snowboarding, you need that much of a conducive snow for it to cushion the landing of the athletes safely. And so it's heat, it's also wet snow, which is a problem. So there are multiple layers, multiple problems that are created because of the change in global climate. And this point hardly came into discussion during the course of the games, because again, when we say that the right points were discussed, I would say the biggest and the most righteous point to be discussed is the climate change, because it's affecting the world for sure, the general population for sure, and it's directly impacting the games as well. So when Mr. Bach comes out and gives out messages, he should probably address the elephant in the house as far as Winter Games is concerned, which is climate change. That is, and of course, these are the larger talking points that should come out for the larger good of any sporting endeavor, for that matter, not just Winter Games. Because when we look at summer games, the kind of facilities that are required now to counter heat wave, for instance, is huge. In Tokyo, they were placing fans and they were placing water sprinklers for marathoners to run. Air-conditioned stadiums are a norm now across the world, and it's about. When we talk about games, major games, and the sustainability, the larger point is how much are we again damaging the environment when we try to sustain a sporting festival? So these are questions that would be asked, I guess, in the near future, and addressed also.
Yeah. I think, in the coming months and years, I think these will become more important. We are, of course, also going to see a Winter Football World Cup happening later in this year in Qatar. So definitely climate and climate change will be a factor there. Thanks very much. That's all the time we have today, Leslie. Thanks very much for those insights on the Winter Olympics, and we'll have you again end of the week for more from the sporting world. That's all we have on the show for today. You've been watching Daily Debrief. For more on all of these stories, visit our website, peoplesdispatch.org, and do give us a follow on all the regular social media platforms for updates. We'll be back again tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.